The night was unusually quiet in the small town on the outskirts of the mountains. The stars sparkled brightly in the sky, and the wind whispered through the trees like a gentle song. In a small garage at the edge of town, a human mechanic was finishing up his work. His hands were greasy, and his clothes smelled of oil and metal, but he loved what he did. He loved fixing things, making broken machines work again, and sometimes even bringing old gadgets back to life. Tonight, however, something told him that this ordinary night would not stay ordinary for long. He was wiping his hands on a rag when a sudden, deafening crash shook the garage. The ground trembled under his feet, and the walls shook as if a giant had hit them. Tools fell from the shelves, and sparks flew from the machines. The mechanic froze for a moment, staring at the doorway, unsure of what he had just heard. His heart pounded in his chest. He had seen a lot in his life, machines breaking in ways he couldn't understand, storms tearing through the town, and even wild animals wandering too close to his garage. But nothing like this. Curiosity and fear pulled him outside. The air was crisp and cold, and the moonlight illuminated the clearing in front of the garage. That's when he saw it. A massive creature lay sprawled on the ground. Its scales shimmered in the moonlight with shades of deep green, blue, and silver. Its wings were tattered, and its chest heaved as it tried to breathe. Clutched gently in its claws was another creature, smaller and weaker, with a faint glow around its body. Both were dragons, but unlike anything the mechanic had ever seen in books or stories. The larger dragon looked at him with wide, urgent eyes. There was pain in those eyes, but also intelligence. It was trying to tell him something, to make him understand that this was a matter of life and death. The smaller dragon let out a soft, pitiful sound that tugged at the mechanic's heart. He had never been so close to a living dragon in his life, and yet he felt an instinctive pull. These creatures needed help, and somehow he knew he had to be the one to give it. For a moment, he hesitated. His mind raced with questions. How could he help something so enormous? What if it attacked him? What if he failed? But he pushed the fear aside. He had fixed impossible things before, machines and vehicles that everyone had given up on. Maybe he could do the same here, even if these were living creatures, not machines. He had to try. Slowly he approached the larger dragon, keeping his hands visible so it would not think he was a threat. The dragon's chest rose and fell rapidly, and it let out a low, rumbling growl that seemed more like a warning than a roar. The mechanic stopped a few feet away, studying it carefully. He noticed the scars on its scales, deep cuts along its wings and legs, and dried blood along its muzzle. Whatever had happened to these creatures was serious. The smaller dragon, its body trembling, looked up at him with glowing, sad eyes. It seemed almost too weak to move. The mechanic swallowed hard and took a deep breath. "Okay," he whispered to himself. "I can do this. I have to." He moved closer, speaking softly in a calm voice, even though he had no idea if the dragons could understand him. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." The larger dragon tilted its head, observing him carefully. Then it made a strange series of sounds-low hums mixed with high-pitched screeches. The mechanic realized it was trying to communicate. He couldn't understand the words, if there were words, but he felt the meaning clearly. "Help my mate. Save it, please." The mechanic's heart ached at the urgency of the message. He quickly ran back into the garage and grabbed every tool and piece of equipment he thought might help. Blankets, ropes, metal sheets, and even the small medkit he used for his own minor injuries. He returned to the clearing, trying to move as gently as possible, not wanting to scare the dragons further. With trembling hands, he laid the blankets carefully around the smaller dragon, trying to make it comfortable. He gently examined its wings and legs, noticing severe burns and cuts that were likely the cause of its weakness. The dragon twitched at his touch, but there was no aggression, only pain. The mechanic worked carefully, cleaning the wounds as best he could with the limited supplies he had. The larger dragon watched closely, pacing and occasionally growling, but it didn't attack. Minutes passed like hours. The night air was filled with the smell of burning scales, metal, and the faint scent of something otherworldly that he couldn't quite identify. Every time he tried to move closer to examine the smaller dragon, the larger one would shift slightly, its gaze following him like a hawk. But there was also trust building, subtle but real. The larger dragon seemed to sense that he meant no harm. The mechanic paused to catch his breath, wiping sweat from his brow. "You're going to be okay," he whispered. "I promise I'll do everything I can." He looked at the smaller dragon, its glowing eyes flickering weakly in the moonlight. It was so small, so fragile, and yet it had survived long enough to land here. Somehow, he knew it wanted to live, and it wanted him to help. He worked tirelessly, improvising as he went. He didn't know how much time had passed. He cleaned wounds, wrapped them in makeshift bandages, and even tried to keep the creature warm. All the while, the larger dragon stayed near, growling softly whenever he moved too quickly or hesitated. The mechanic began to understand that this dragon wasn't just protecting its mate, it was aware, thinking and communicating in its own way. At one point, the larger dragon leaned forward, gently nudging the smaller one with its snout. Weaker dragon let out a faint chirp and nuzzled back. The mechanic felt a pang of emotion he hadn't expected. These were not just animals, they were a family. They loved each other. And now, somehow, he had become part of that moment. Hours seemed to pass, though the mechanic couldn't be sure. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but he didn't stop. He cleaned more wounds, tried to assess injuries he didn't fully understand, and did his best to stabilize the smaller dragon. He had no idea if it would survive the night, but he knew that every small effort mattered. As dawn began to break, the first light of the sun reflected off the dragon's shimmering scales. The smaller dragon's breathing was still weak, but it had stopped trembling as violently. The larger dragon lowered its massive head, almost bowing as if to show gratitude. The mechanic stepped back, his body aching, and watched them. He didn't speak. Words seemed unnecessary. He had done what he could for now, and the bond between human and dragons had begun to form. For the first time, he realized that his life had changed forever. He had come out to check on a noise, expecting perhaps a fallen tree or a malfunctioning machine, and instead had found something miraculous. 2 alien dragons, one dying, one desperate, had appeared in his world. And he had been brave enough, perhaps foolish enough, to help as the sun rose higher, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and gold. The mechanic knew this was only the beginning. The night had shown him something beyond understanding, something that would test his courage, his skill, and his heart. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of quiet relief. He had survived the first night, and he had given life a chance. To continue. Little did he know, the days ahead would bring challenges he could never have imagined, challenges that would push him to the limits of what it meant to be human, to care, and to trust the impossible. But in this moment, with the first rays of light falling on the dragon's scales, he simply breathed, ready for whatever came next. The morning air was cool and crisp, carrying the smell of wet earth and pine from the nearby forest. The mechanic stayed outside his garage, still staring at the dragons. The larger dragon sat a short distance away, watching him carefully, its wings folded neatly against its back. Its eyes were alert, but there was no aggression, only a steady, patient observation, like it was waiting to see what the human would do next. The smaller dragon, the one he had spent the night trying to help, was resting on the blankets he had spread out. It was breathing more steadily now, though it was clear that it was still weak. Its glowing eyes occasionally flickered, and every so often it shivered as if fighting through pain. The mechanic realized that time was critical. If he didn't do something soon, the dragon might not survive. He knelt beside the smaller dragon, carefully inspecting its injuries again. Its wings had deep tears, its tail was scraped and raw, and its body was covered with burns from what looked like some kind of fire. He had never seen injuries like this before. Machines broke and bent, but living creatures carried pain in ways that no wrench or screwdriver could fix. He had to find a way to help it heal, and fast out as he worked, the larger dragon came closer, moving slowly so as not to startle him. It nudged the smaller dragon gently with its snout, making a low rumbling sound. The mechanic looked up and realized that the larger dragon was trying to communicate something. He had already noticed that it was intelligent, but this felt different. This was more than just instinct. It was asking him to understand, to act, to care for its mate. The mechanic took a deep breath and spoke softly. "I understand. I'll do everything I can. I won't let it die." The larger dragon tilted its head slightly, as if acknowledging him, and stepped back a little, giving him space to work. He started with the burns first, carefully applying a cooling gel he had made from some chemicals and natural ingredients he had in his garage. He didn't know if it would work on a dragon, especially one from another world, but it was worth trying. He applied it gently, feeling the heat radiating from the dragon's scales. The smaller dragon hissed softly, not in anger, but in discomfort. He spoke to it in calm tones, telling it it would be okay, that he was helping. Slowly, it seemed to relax, letting him continue. Next, he examined the torn wings. He had to be extremely careful. One wrong move could make things worse. He used strong tape and fabric to hold the tears together as best he could, improvising splints from metal rods he had in the garage. Every movement had to be precise. The larger dragon watched him the entire time, occasionally giving a low growl that sounded like a warning, reminding him to be gentle. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. The mechanic's arms ached, his hands were scratched and covered in blood, not his own, but the dragon's. Still, he didn't stop. Every small improvement gave him hope. The smaller dragon blinked more steadily now. Its breathing was less labored, and it even moved its tail slightly. These were tiny victories, but they mattered. At one point, the larger dragon stepped closer again and lowered its head to the smaller dragon. The smaller dragon responded, nuzzling its mate. The mechanic watched, amazed, realizing the depth of their bond. They weren't just creatures, they were a family. They cared for each other deeply, and now he had become a part of that bond, even if only for a short time. Feeling encouraged, the mechanic decided he needed more tools. He ran back to the garage and returned with a portable generator, some lights, and a small heating pad. The smaller dragon's body was weak, and he thought the warmth might help it recover faster. As he set up the pad and adjusted the lights, he noticed the larger dragon watching curiously, tilting its head as if trying to understand what he was doing. He realized it was observing him carefully, learning and judging whether he could be trusted. He spoke softly again. "I'm not your enemy. I just want to help." The larger dragon rumbled, a sound that seemed almost like approval. Slowly, it stepped back again, giving him room to work. The mechanic worked tirelessly, checking the smaller dragon's injuries repeatedly, cleaning, bandaging, and adjusting his makeshift treatments. Every small improvement brought relief and hope, but he knew the real challenge was still ahead. The dragon's burns were severe, and its wings might never be the same. The tail injuries were deep, and he didn't fully understand the alien anatomy. Still, he refused to give up. As he worked, he noticed the dragons had a strange energy around them. The smaller dragon's body glowed faintly in certain areas, especially where the injuries were deepest. He didn't understand it, but he realized the energy might be helping it survive. He adjusted his treatments, trying to align with whatever natural process was happening in the dragon's body. The larger dragon watched him carefully, its eyes narrowing in focus, almost as if it were trying to guide him without speaking. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing. The mechanic felt a mixture of exhaustion and determination. He had been working for hours, but he couldn't stop now. Every small movement mattered. Every adjustment could make the difference between life and death. Suddenly, the smaller dragon moved slightly on its own. Its glowing eyes flickered, and it let out a soft, weak sound. The mechanic's heart leapt. It was a sign of life, a signal that his efforts were having an effect. He continued working, more carefully than ever, using gentle hands and soft words to encourage the fragile creature. The larger dragon shifted its position, sitting closer to the mechanic now, almost like a guard. It wasn't aggressive, but it was protective. Every time the mechanic moved his hands too quickly, the dragon let out a low growl, reminding him to be careful. Yet there was trust there now, a fragile understanding forming between them. As night approached again, the mechanic stepped back for a moment, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked at the smaller dragon, its breathing steadier, its glow brighter in certain areas. He allowed himself a small sigh of relief. He had managed to stabilize it, at least for now. But he knew the next steps would be even harder. Healing a creature from another world, one so intelligent and powerful, would require more than just skill and courage. It would require patience, understanding, and trust from the dragons themselves. The larger dragon nudged the smaller one gently, and the smaller dragon responded by leaning against its mate. The mechanic watched, moved by the moment. These creatures had survived so much, and yet here they were, still fighting to live. He realized that his role in this story was no longer just about fixing injuries. It was about being part of a bond, helping two beings who trusted him enough to let him in. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "We'll get through this. I'll keep you alive." The larger dragon made a low rumble in response, and for the first time, the mechanic felt a deep sense of connection. He wasn't just a human mechanic anymore. He was a guardian, a friend, a part of something extraordinary. As the stars began to appear in the sky, the mechanic prepared for another long night. He set up blankets, checked the heating pad, and made sure the smaller dragon was as comfortable as possible. The larger dragon remained nearby, vigilant and watchful. The mechanic knew this night would be difficult, but he was ready to face it. He leaned back against the garage wall for a moment, closing his eyes, letting the quiet of the night wash over him. He thought about how strange and miraculous this situation was. Just yesterday, he had been alone, fixing machines in his small garage. Now, he was caring for creatures from another world, facing challenges he had never imagined, and forming bonds that would change his life forever. He opened his eyes and looked at the dragons. The smaller one blinked up at him, and the larger one's eyes reflected the moonlight. There was understanding there, a silent promise that they trusted him, that they believed in him. And in that moment, the mechanic realized something important. Courage wasn't about not feeling fear. Courage was about moving forward, even when the outcome was uncertain, and even when the stakes were higher than anything he had ever faced. With renewed determination, he prepared for the long night ahead, ready to do everything he could to save the smaller dragon. He didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. He would not give up. Not now, not ever. The night stretched on, the air quiet except for the occasional sound of the smaller dragon breathing and the rustle of the larger dragon's wings. The mechanic worked tirelessly, guided by instinct, compassion, and the strange, glowing energy that seemed to flow from the dragons themselves. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew that together they could face it. And so, under the stars, in the cold night air, a human and two alien dragons began a journey that none of them could have imagined, a journey of trust, courage, and a bond that would defy the boundaries of worlds. The morning light filtered through the clouds, casting soft shadows across the clearing. The mechanic had barely slept, his body sore from the previous night's work, but his mind was entirely focused on the smaller dragon. It was resting, but every shallow breath reminded him that time was critical. He knew that the injuries were severe, and without proper care, the dragon might not make it through the day. The larger dragon remained close by, standing guard and observing every movement the mechanic made. It occasionally let out a low, vibrating rumble that sounded almost like a warning. The mechanic understood, was telling him to be careful. Every step he took, every touch of his hands mattered. He couldn't afford a single mistake. He began with the wounds on the smaller dragon's wings. The deep tears were more serious than he had first realized. The skin was delicate and almost translucent in places, and some of the muscles underneath were exposed. He had never treated anything like this before. Machines were simple compared to living creatures, and he was learning that every adjustment could either help or harm. He spoke softly as he worked, almost as if the dragon could understand him. "I know it hurts. I'm not going to hurt you. More, I'm just trying to help." The smaller dragon twitched slightly, but didn't pull away. Somehow, it seemed to understand that he meant no harm. The larger dragon shifted its massive body closer, keeping a protective watch while letting him continue. The mechanic carefully used metal splints and soft, flexible materials he had found in the garage to align the tears in the wings. Every movement had to be precise. If he pressed too hard, he could cause more damage. If he was too gentle, the wings might not heal properly. Sweat dripped down his face as he focused, his hands trembling slightly with the pressure of responsibility. He paused for a moment, stepping back to assess his work. The wings were stabilized as best as he could manage, but the burns and cuts on the smaller dragon's body were still severe. He turned his attention there next. Using a mixture of cool gels and improvised bandages, he carefully cleaned the wounds. The dragon hissed softly, not in anger, but in discomfort. The mechanic whispered soothing words, running his hands gently over its trembling body. "You're doing great. Just a little longer. We'll get through this." Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. The mechanic barely noticed. His world had shrunk to this moment, this dragon, and the urgent need to save it. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had never faced anything like this, but somehow he had to find a way to succeed. The larger dragon moved closer again, this time letting out a series of sounds that seemed almost like instructions. The mechanic realized it was trying to communicate in its own way. It nudged the smaller dragon, adjusted its position slightly, and then stepped back to let him work. It was strange and beautiful, the way these creatures understood each other, and now included him in their world. The mechanic felt a rush of emotion. He had never experienced anything like this before. Here he was, a human, surrounded by alien dragons, caring for a creature that could die if he made a single wrong move. And yet he also felt hope. Every small sign of improvement, the dragon's breathing stabilizing, the faint glow returning to its scales, was proof that he was making a difference. By midday, the mechanic realized he needed to give the dragon something to eat or drink, but that was a challenge he hadn't faced before. The smaller dragon was too weak to eat on its own, and he didn't know what it could digest. He carefully experimented, offering small drops of water mixed with a bit of energy gel he had created, using some of the alien crystals he had found near the dragons. The dragon hesitated at first, then licked a few drops. Its tail flicked slightly, sign that it was responding. The mechanic felt a small thrill of triumph. It was a tiny victory, but in situations like this, tiny victories counted. He kept talking to the dragons, explaining what he was doing, even though he knew they might not understand every word. Somehow, he felt they did. They understood the intention, and that seemed enough. As the afternoon wore on, the larger dragon became more comfortable with him. It stopped pacing as much, letting him work closer to the smaller dragon. Occasionally, it would nudge the injured dragon gently, as if encouraging it to trust him. The mechanic realized that the bond between the dragons and him was growing stronger. Trust was being formed, slowly, carefully, one small action at a time. The mechanic noticed something remarkable. The smaller dragon's glow was becoming more consistent. The injured areas were faintly shimmering, almost as if the energy from the larger dragon was helping the healing process. He watched, fascinated. He had never seen anything like it. He had thought the alien crystals might help, but it seemed there was something innate in these creatures that responded to care, trust, and perhaps the human's own energy. Even as he marveled, he did not let himself relax. The dragon was still, fragile. One sudden movement, one careless touch, could undo everything. He carefully adjusted the bandages, monitored its breathing, and continued to apply the cooling gel. Every action was deliberate, precise, and full of care. By late afternoon, the smaller dragon began to move slightly on its own. It lifted its head, then tried to shift its wings. The mechanic held his breath. This was progress. It wasn't fully healed, not by far, but it was alive, responsive, and showing signs of recovery. The larger dragon watched, letting out a low rumble that sounded almost like pride. The mechanic felt his chest tighten. He realized he was emotionally invested in this dragon, in these dragons. This wasn't just work. This was life and death, trust and care, and he was part of it now. The thought both terrified and exhilarated him. He had never imagined he could feel such a connection with creatures so alien, so different from anything on Earth. As the evening approached, he set up a small shelter using blankets, metal sheets, and some equipment from his garage. He made a cozy space for the smaller dragon, giving it warmth and protection for the night. The larger dragon stayed close by, watching over both of them, its eyes reflecting the last light of the sun. The mechanic leaned back against the garage wall, exhausted. His body ached, but there was a deep satisfaction in his chest. He had stabilized. The dragon, seen signs of recovery, and formed a bond that went beyond words. He realized that courage wasn't about not feeling fear. It was about taking action, even when the outcome was uncertain. He had faced fear, responsibility, and the unknown, and he had made a difference. Night fell again, and the stars appeared overhead, twinkling like distant sparks of hope. The smaller dragon rested, breathing more steadily, its glow dim but consistent. The larger dragon sat nearby, its massive body relaxed but alert. The mechanic watched them, amazed at the strength, trust, and resilience these creatures possessed. He knew the next days would bring more challenges. Healing wasn't just about tending to wounds. It was about patience, observation, and understanding. He would have to learn the dragon's rhythms, their reactions, and their needs. But he felt ready. He had already learned so much in just 2 days. He had learned about trust, empathy, and the delicate balance between courage and caution. For the first time, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. Just days ago, he had been alone in his garage, working on machines. Now, he was part of a story that spanned worlds, caring for beings who trusted him with their lives. He realized that life was bigger and stranger than he had ever imagined. And sometimes, the most unexpected moments, The sound of a crash, the sight of a wounded dragon could change everything. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "We are going to make it. We're going to get through this together." The smaller dragon shifted slightly, as if responding, and the larger dragon let out a low rumble that seemed almost like agreement. In that moment, the mechanic felt a connection that was beyond words. It was trust, gratitude, and the shared goal of survival. As the night deepened, he stayed vigilant, watching over the dragons, adjusting their blankets, and monitoring their breathing. Every so often, the smaller dragon would twitch, and the larger one would shift its position protectively. The mechanic knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he also knew that they were not alone. Together, human and dragons, they were forming a bond that would help them face whatever came next. And so, under the blanket of stars, the mechanic worked quietly through the night, guided by instinct, empathy, and the fragile hope that with care, courage, and trust, life could be preserved even against impossible odds. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The mechanic had barely slept, but exhaustion didn't matter anymore. He had begun to understand something important. This was no longer just about saving a dragon. It was about trust, connection, and the bond that formed between beings who depended on one another for survival. The larger dragon sat nearby, wings folded neatly, eyes alert. It no longer paced anxiously like it had on the first day. Somehow, it seemed calmer, more confident that the human was on their side. The smaller dragon, though still weak, was showing signs of improvement. Its breathing was steadier, its glowing eyes flickering more consistently, and it even shifted slightly on its own. The mechanic felt a spark of hope. It was small, but it was enough to push him forward. He knew the journey was far from over, but these tiny victories meant everything. He approached the smaller dragon slowly, speaking softly. "Good morning. You've done well through the night. I know it hurts, but we're going to help you heal more today." The dragon tilted its head slightly, and the larger dragon rumbled in response, almost like a supportive nod. The mechanic smiled, feeling a strange but comforting connection with both creatures. He began by examining the dragon's wings again. The splints and bandages had held, but he needed to ensure the healing process continued smoothly. Carefully, he adjusted the bandages, checking the alignment of the torn areas. Every movement was deliberate. The smaller dragon winced slightly, but didn't resist. The trust that had begun to form over the last few days was growing stronger. As he worked, he noticed something remarkable. The smaller dragon's body seemed to respond to his touch in ways he couldn't explain. Where he applied the cooling gel, the faint glow in the dragon's scales brightened. Where he adjusted the bandages, the muscles beneath seemed to twitch with renewed strength. It was as if the dragon's own energy was beginning to heal it, amplified by the care and attention he provided. The mechanic marveled at this. He had repaired broken machines, but he had never witnessed anything like this before. It was living, intelligent, and responsive in ways he had never imagined. And the larger dragon wasn't just a bystander, it was guiding him, offering subtle instructions with nudges, rumbles, and gestures. Somehow, together, they were creating a rhythm, a silent communication that transcended language. By midday, the mechanic realized he needed to try feeding the smaller dragon more properly. The previous attempts with water and energy gel had worked, but the creature needed more nutrition to continue healing. He experimented carefully, offering small bites of soft, glowing material he had fashioned from alien crystals and local food. The dragon hesitated, then slowly accepted a tiny portion. Its tail flicked slightly, a sign of encouragement from the larger dragon. The mechanic smiled. That's it. Just a little at a time. He knew it was progress, even if slow. Each small success built hope for the next step, Hours passed, and the heat of the afternoon settled over the clearing. The mechanic continued to monitor and care for the smaller dragon, cleaning wounds, adjusting bandages, and speaking in soft, reassuring tones. The larger dragon stayed close, occasionally nudging the injured one, reminding it to rest or encouraging it to respond. The mechanic realized how much this bond mattered. Without the larger dragon's cooperation, the smaller dragon might never have survived. As evening approached, he noticed another small miracle. The glowing energy in the smaller dragon was becoming steadier and brighter. The injured areas seemed less inflamed, and the creature even moved its wings slightly on its own. The mechanic couldn't explain it scientifically, but he didn't need to. He only knew that care, patience, and trust were making a difference. The larger dragon shifted closer to him, sitting in a protective circle around the smaller one. It lowered its massive head, almost bowing, and the mechanic realized it was expressing gratitude. The creatures trusted him now, and he trusted them in return. There was no fear, only connection and purpose. The mechanic took a deep breath and spoke softly. "You're stronger than you think. I can see it. We're going to get through this together." The larger dragon rumbled, and the smaller one twitched its tail. He felt a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. This was no longer just a task. This was life, and he was a part of it. As night fell, the mechanic set up a more secure space for the smaller dragon. He layered blankets, adjusted the heating pad, and arranged the tools he needed for monitoring. The larger dragon remained vigilant, standing guard, wings partially extended to create a sense of safety. The mechanic realized how much this creature relied on him, just as he relied on them for guidance and trust. The night passed with relative calm. The smaller dragon's breathing remained steady, and the glowing energy persisted. The larger dragon occasionally made soft rumbling sounds, almost like a lullaby, which seemed to comfort the smaller one. The mechanic watched in awe, realizing that healing was not just about medicine or bandages. It was about emotional support, trust, and the bond between beings. By the following morning, the smaller dragon's strength had improved noticeably. It tried to lift its head without assistance, and its tail flicked more confidently. The mechanic felt a surge of pride. All the hours of careful tending, the sleepless nights, and the patient work were paying off. This was progress, real progress. The larger dragon approached him, lowering its head to meet his gaze. Its eyes reflected a mix of gratitude, respect, and intelligence that took the mechanic's breath away. He had never felt so connected to another being before. It was more than trust, it was understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the role he had played in their survival. The mechanic realized something important. This experience had changed him. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and the unknown. He had cared for beings from another world, beings whose very existence seemed impossible. And through it all, he had learned the power of patience, empathy, and trust. He understood now that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was acting despite fear, for the sake of someone else's life. He spoke softly, almost as a promise to both dragons. "You're going to be okay. We'll keep going. I won't give up." The larger dragon rumbled in response, and the smaller one shifted slightly, acknowledging him in its own way. For the first time, he felt a sense of hope that went beyond survival. He could see the potential for full recovery. The day continued with careful attention to the smaller dragon's wounds, feeding, and comfort. The mechanic observed every twitch, every breath, every flicker of glow, learning more about how these creatures healed and responded. He marveled at their resilience, at the way life could persist even in the face of severe injury and danger. As evening approached once again, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The smaller dragon was stronger, more responsive, and beginning to show personality, curious, cautious, and intelligent. The larger dragon remained nearby, protective and watchful, but also more relaxed. They had both accepted him as part of their world. The mechanic realized that healing was about more than physical care. It was about connection, patience, and shared purpose. The dragons had taught him that life was fragile, but it was also resilient. With trust and care, even the most impossible situations could improve. As night fell, he set up the blankets and heating pad for another night of rest and recovery. The smaller dragon settled into the nest he had made, glowing softly, and the larger dragon sat in a circle around them both, wings creating a protective barrier. The mechanic leaned back against the garage wall, exhausted but fulfilled. He had never imagined he could feel such a connection, such responsibility, and such hope. Looking up at the stars, he whispered softly, "We'll keep going. We'll get through this together." The dragons responded in their own ways, the larger with a deep rumble, the smaller with a slight flicker of its tail. The mechanic smiled, feeling the bond grow stronger. This was no longer just about survival. It was about trust, care, and the extraordinary connections that could exist between beings from different worlds. And in that quiet night, under the vast sky, the mechanic knew that the journey was far from over, but together they could face whatever came next. The morning light spilled over the clearing, soft and warm, signaling a new day. The mechanic had been awake before dawn, checking on the smaller dragon. Overnight, its breathing had remained steady, and the faint glow in its scales was stronger than before. He felt a surge of hope. The dragon had survived through sheer resilience, but he also knew that today would be critical. The next steps could determine whether it would recover fully or fall back into weakness. The larger dragon, ever watchful, had positioned itself close to the smaller one, wings partially extended to provide protection and comfort. Its eyes followed the mechanic's every movement, studying him carefully. There was no hostility, only vigilance. The mechanic had come to understand that this creature's intelligence went far beyond instinct. It was not just guarding, it was cooperating, communicating in ways he could barely comprehend. The mechanic took a deep breath and spoke softly to both dragons. "Today, we take another big step. You're stronger, but we need to help you even more." The smaller dragon lifted its head slightly, and the larger one gave a low, approving rumble. Somehow, he understood that they trusted him to guide the process, to help them navigate this delicate stage of healing. He began by examining the smaller dragon's wings once again. The tears had begun to close slightly, the muscles beneath twitching as if responding to life itself. Using a combination of careful pressure and gentle alignment, he adjusted the splints and bandages, ensuring that the wings were supported without restricting natural movement. The smaller dragon hissed softly, not in anger, but as a sign of discomfort. The mechanic murmured reassurances. "I know it hurts, but this will help you fly again. Trust me." As he worked, he noticed something remarkable. The glowing energy in the smaller dragon's scales reacted to his hands. Where he applied pressure or aligned the wings, the glow intensified, spreading along the damaged areas. It was as if the dragon itself was accelerating its healing, responding to the humans. Careful attention. The mechanic marveled at the bond forming between them, not just trust, but a kind of mutual support. The larger dragon made a series of soft, complex sounds and nudged the smaller one gently. The mechanic realized it was guiding him, showing where adjustments were needed, where extra care was necessary. He followed its cues, learning from it as much as it was learning from him. It was a dance of cooperation and empathy, an understanding that transcended language. By midday, the mechanic knew it was time to address the smaller dragon's diet. The previous attempts at feeding had been cautious and small, but now the dragon needed more substantial nutrition to continue healing. He prepared a mixture of softened energy crystals and nutrient-rich paste, offering tiny portions first. The dragon hesitated, eyeing the mixture warily, but the larger dragon nudged it gently, as if saying, "It's safe. You need this." Slowly, the smaller dragon accepted the food, licking a few bites and then pausing. The mechanic encouraged it softly. "Good. Just a little more. You're doing well." The dragon's tail flicked slightly in response, a signal that it understood and felt reassured. The larger dragon rumbled approvingly, and the mechanic realized that even this small act of feeding was a shared victory, a sign that the creature's trust in him was deepening. The afternoon passed in a rhythm of careful attention. The mechanic cleaned wounds, checked the alignment of splints, monitored breathing, and adjusted the heating pad. The smaller dragon moved more freely now, occasionally stretching its wings slightly or turning its head to look at him. The larger dragon remained close, shifting positions occasionally to maintain protection, but never interfering with the care process. The air was filled with a strange, quiet energy, a combination of trust, healing, and connection that the mechanic had never experienced before. As evening approached, something unbelievable happened. The smaller dragon emitted a pulse of energy that seemed to react with the crystals the mechanic had been using. The glow in its scales intensified, spreading along the damaged wings and burns. The muscles beneath began to flex and strengthen. The mechanic watched in awe as the dragon's body seemed to heal before his eyes. He could hardly believe it. The injuries that had appeared severe were mending at an astonishing rate. The larger dragon leaned forward, nudging its mate gently, almost as if encouraging it to continue this miraculous process. The smaller dragon responded, moving more confidently, lifting its wings slightly, and even attempting a weak flap. The mechanic's heart raced. This was more than recovery. It was a miracle, a sign that the bond between human and dragons was producing results beyond what he had imagined. He continued his work carefully, supporting the smaller dragon as it experimented with small movements. He aligned the wings when necessary, offered water and nutrients, and spoke constantly in calm, reassuring tones. "That's it. You're doing amazing. Keep going." Every word seemed to resonate with the dragons, especially the smaller one, which appeared to draw strength from his presence. Night fell, and the stars sparkled in the sky, but the mechanic did not rest. The glow of the smaller dragon illuminated the clearing, a soft, comforting light that reflected the progress made during the day. The larger dragon remained vigilant, its massive body a protective shield. For the first time, the mechanic felt that the worst of the danger had passed. The smaller dragon was alive, responsive, and showing signs of real recovery. As he watched them, he realized how extraordinary this moment was. He had been a mechanic, someone who repaired machines, yet here he was, participating in a miracle of life. He had learned that courage, patience, and trust could create results that defied logic. The dragon's survival was not just about medical care. It was about connection, empathy, and the willingness to act despite uncertainty. The smaller dragon moved again, more strongly this time, stretching its wings and attempting to lift its head. The larger dragon nudged it gently, and it responded with a flicker of its tail. The mechanic's chest tightened with emotion. All the sleepless nights, the uncertainty, and the intense focus had led to this moment. Life had won, and the bond they shared had made it possible. He spoke softly to them, almost as a promise. "You're going to be okay. I won't let anything happen to you. You're strong, and together we'll keep going." The larger dragon rumbled in response, a deep, satisfied sound, and the smaller dragon emitted a weak but clear hum of acknowledgement. The human and the dragons had become a team, each relying on the other for survival, trust, and hope. The night deepened, but the mechanic stayed awake, monitoring the dragons. The smaller one had regained enough strength to move slightly and even explore its small area. The glow in its scales was consistent, and it responded to his presence with confidence. The larger dragon sat in a circle around them, protective and calm, signaling that the danger had passed and that the healing process was truly underway. As he leaned against the garage wall, exhausted but fulfilled, the mechanic reflected on the journey so far. Just a few days ago, he had been alone, repairing machines in a quiet garage. Now, he was part of something extraordinary, caring for beings from another world, witnessing miraculous healing, and forming a bond that transcended species. He understood. Something vital. Life, in all its forms, was resilient, and the right mix of care, patience, and connection could bring even the gravely injured back from the brink. He whispered softly to the dragons, "We've come so far, and we'll go even further together." The larger dragon rumbled, and the smaller one flicked its tail, a quiet acknowledgement. They were no longer just creatures he was helping. They were partners in a shared journey, beings who had trusted him, and whom he trusted in return. As the stars twinkled overhead, the mechanic knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. But he also knew that he was not alone. Together, human and dragons, they had achieved something incredible. The smaller dragon's recovery was well underway, and the bond they shared was stronger than ever. And in that quiet, glowing clearing under the vast sky, the mechanic understood a profound truth. Trust, care, and courage could create miracles. And sometimes, the most unbelievable moments in life were the ones that tested the heart the most. The sun rose slowly over the clearing, casting golden light across the dragons and the small garage that had become their temporary home. The mechanic woke early, feeling a mix of excitement and cautious anticipation. The smaller dragon, once fragile and barely able to move, was now stirring with a surprising energy. Its glow was steady, warm, and vibrant, reflecting a strength that had returned after days of careful care. The larger dragon was already awake, standing protectively nearby, eyes alert and watchful. It no longer paced anxiously, as it had in the first days. Its posture was calm, almost proud, and it occasionally gave low, approving rumbles as it watched the smaller dragon move. The mechanic took a deep breath. He could hardly believe how far they had come. He approached the smaller dragon slowly, hands held out in a gesture of reassurance. "Good morning. You've done so well. Today, we take the final steps to get you fully strong again." The dragon's eyes flickered, and it lifted its head confidently. The larger dragon let out a gentle rumble, almost like a warning to anyone else in the world. "She is safe. She is ready." The mechanic began with a careful inspection. The burns had almost completely healed. The wounds on the wings were closing perfectly, and the muscles beneath were beginning to regain their strength. He gently tested the dragon's wings, supporting them as it attempted to stretch them fully. The creature flinched at first, still cautious, but with gentle encouragement, it slowly spread its wings, testing the movement without resistance. The larger dragon watched intently, occasionally nudging its mate with a soft snout, as if providing moral support. The mechanic marveled at the depth of their bond. He had always known these dragons cared for each other, but seeing the encouragement, guidance, and mutual trust in action was something extraordinary. It was a bond that transcended words, a quiet language of gestures, glances, and energy. By midday, it was time for the smaller dragon to try standing on its own. It hesitated, shifting its weight cautiously. The mechanic knelt beside it, hands hovering near for support, but not touching unless necessary. "You can do this." "I'm right." "Here, trust yourself," he whispered. Slowly, the dragon lifted itself, first on unsteady legs, then with increasing confidence. The larger dragon rumbled softly, stepping closer, circling protectively, making sure nothing interrupted this moment. The mechanic's heart pounded. After days of care, sleepless nights, and constant worry, the dragon was standing, moving, and testing its strength. He had witnessed miracles before in machines he had repaired, but nothing compared to this. This was life, raw and resilient, pushing itself forward against impossible odds. He encouraged it further, holding out small amounts of food and water. The dragon approached cautiously, tasting it without hesitation. Every small movement, every interaction, was proof of recovery. The mechanic's chest tightened with emotion, relief, pride, and wonder all at once. He had helped this creature survive, and now it was thriving. The larger dragon finally shifted its position, wings extending slightly, creating a protective canopy. It nudged the smaller dragon gently, as if saying, "You've made it. You are ready." The smaller dragon responded by lifting its head, wings fully extended in a graceful, tentative stretch. The mechanic stood back, watching in awe. The transformation was complete. The weak, trembling dragon was now strong, healthy, and full of life. As the afternoon sun warmed the clearing, the dragons began to interact more naturally. The larger dragon encouraged flight, flapping its wings in controlled movements. The smaller dragon followed suit, flapping its own wings, testing balance, and taking small jumps into the air. Each attempt grew more confident until it was leaping, gliding, and eventually taking brief flights. The mechanic clapped quietly, not wanting to startle them, but feeling immense pride. "You've done it. You're both incredible," he whispered. The larger dragon rumbled in response, eyes meeting his with intelligence and gratitude. It was clear that the dragons recognized him as part of their world now, a friend and guardian who had given them a chance to survive. As evening approached, the mechanic realized that their bond had grown far deeper than he could have imagined. This was not just a story of healing. It was a story of trust, courage, and connection. He had faced fear and uncertainty, and through patience and care, he had helped beings from another world recover and thrive. And in return, they had accepted him, taught him, and shown him a strength beyond human comprehension. The stars began to appear in the night sky, reflecting in the dragon's shimmering scales. The smaller dragon settled beside its mate, wings folding neatly, while the larger dragon lowered its head protectively. The mechanic approached, speaking softly. "You're home now, safe, strong, and together. You've both done so well." The dragons responded with gentle sounds, the larger rumbling and the smaller emitting a soft, glowing hum. It was their way of acknowledging him, their way of saying thanks without words. He stayed with them that night, watching as they rested, finally able to breathe with relief. The smaller dragon, once on the brink of death, now radiated strength. The larger dragon, once tense and anxious, now exuded calm and pride. The mechanic realized that life had brought them together for a reason. In helping them survive, he had discovered something profound about himself. Courage is not just about facing danger. It is about care, empathy, and the willingness to act for others, even when the outcome is uncertain. The following days were filled with further bonding. The dragons practiced flying more confidently, exploring the clearing, and interacting with the mechanic in playful, curious ways. They tested boundaries, nudged him gently, and allowed him to participate fully in their lives. The mechanic learned their patterns, understood their moods, and anticipated their needs. The bond of trust between human and dragons had become unbreakable. One morning, the smaller dragon finally took its first full flight, soaring above the clearing, with the larger dragon following closely. The mechanic watched, tears in his eyes. As the dragons glided through the sky, their movements synchronized, their trust in each other and in him evident in every flap of their wings. He could hardly believe he had witnessed such a transformation, from fragile, injured creatures to powerful, confident beings, capable of flight and independence. After their flight, the dragons returned to the mechanic, landing softly near him. The smaller dragon nuzzled his hand gently, a silent thank you, while the larger dragon lowered its head, eyes reflecting intelligence, gratitude, and trust. In that moment, the mechanic understood something profound. He had not just saved their lives. He had become part of their world. He was no longer just a human mechanic. He was a friend, a guardian, and a partner in an extraordinary journey. The night came again, calm and peaceful. The dragons rested near him, fully healed, fully alive, and fully trusting. The mechanic leaned back, exhausted but fulfilled, reflecting on everything that had happened. The crash, the sudden appearance of the dragons, the sleepless nights of awe, care and worry, the slow progress of healing, it all led to this moment. They had survived, thrived, and formed a bond that transcended worlds. He whispered softly, "You're safe now. You're strong, and you're free. Thank you for trusting me." The dragons responded in their own ways, the larger with a deep rumble, the smaller with a glowing flicker. It was their acknowledgement, their way of saying that they understood. The depth of care and connection that had grown between them. The mechanic realized that life had a strange way of testing courage, patience, and heart. Sometimes the most unbelievable moments came when one least expected them. And sometimes those moments could change everything, saving lives, forming bonds, and creating stories that would be remembered forever. As the stars twinkled overhead, the mechanic smiled, knowing that his life had been forever changed. The dragons were healed, together, and free to explore their world. And he had discovered something extraordinary, the power of empathy, trust, and unwavering care. Life, he realized, was not measured by machines repaired or tasks completed, but by the lives touched, the bonds formed, and the courage to act when it truly mattered. And so, under the quiet night sky, the mechanic, the larger dragon, and the smaller dragon rested together, a family forged through struggle, care, and trust. The impossible had been made real. The dying had been saved. And in the heart of that quiet clearing, a bond had been formed that would last a lifetime, proof that courage, love, and care could create miracles, even across worlds.